Welcome to the Burn Your Mortgage Podcast, a Canadian real estate podcast that shows you how to pay off your mortgage sooner and live well while doing it. Now, here's your host, Sean Cooper.
Welcome to the Burn Your Mortgage Podcast. I'm Sean Cooper, and it's great to be back for another episode. On today's show, I'll be talking to MacKenzie Wilson of SingleKey. SingleKey helps landlords find the right tenant and manage risks that come with renting. Screen tenants, run background checks, and protect your property with SingleKey's rent guarantee results in only 5 minutes, trusted by 90,000 landlords. MacKenzie Wilson increases the supply of affordable housing through grassroots education of Alberta landlords, uses technology to instill best practices and reduce the risk for landlords and tenants across Canada. He is co-founder and managing partner of the largest Facebook group for Alberta Landlords, the Alberta Landlord community. In my interview with MacKenzie, we discuss what is SingleKey, SingleKey's unique tenant report and rent guarantee, and how SingleKey helps make becoming a landlord risk-free. And just a quick pause before we start today's episode. Please refer to our show notes as we have an exclusive offer to all our loyal listeners to save money on SingleKey's tenant report as well as the rent guarantee. Without further ado, here's my interview with MacKenzie Wilson. Hi, Mac. How are you doing today?
Hey, Sean. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yes, it's great to have you. You were generous enough to invite me on your podcast, on the SingleKey podcast there. So excited to return the favor. And yes, SingleKey is a great tool that I've learned quite a bit about over the last few months here. And I'm super excited to share it with my audience here and discuss all the benefits for people that are maybe on the fence about becoming landlords. They like the potential investment part about how much they can make from rental property, but maybe they don't like the extra work that comes along with it. So definitely SingleKey can help a lot in that area there. So definitely excited to share that with the audience today.
Cool.
Great. Well, let's get started. So some of the listeners may have heard of SingleKey, but for the listeners who have not heard of SingleKey, can you tell me a bit about SingleKey? What is SingleKey exactly? Maybe, I don't know if you know the story of why it's called SingleKey there, but yes, if you could just tell the listeners, assuming that they've just never heard of SingleKey, I'm sure some of them have, but yeah, just tell them about SingleKey and what you do to make the life of landlords easier, because yeah, like I said, some people maybe want to become landlords, but they have some concerns there. So how do SingleKey help with those potential concerns?
Yeah, for sure. So that's actually a really great question, Sean, about the origin of the name SingleKey. I don't know that. And now I'm going to go and ask Phil that because I want to know that. So I'll dig into that. But just quickly for folks that aren't aware of what SingleKey is and what it does, we've got 3 services that it breaks into. All services can be used independently. Our bread and butter or go-to service is our digital application and credit report. And actually, you know what? There's actually even a 4th service. There's pre-screen form too. That it's a very basic application or very quick questionnaire that is really good to help qualify a tenant before you book a viewing. It saves everyone a bit of time because obviously if someone doesn't qualify for their own property, you don't want to go through and do the viewing and waste each other's time. So there's that component. But once they go and you have to come to your property, they've done the viewing, they're happy, you've got a good impression with them, you've liked what you've seen so far, and they're asking for an application, you go onto your SingleKey platform, you create an application link, you just send it over to them, and then all the applications all online. It's very comprehensive. You have the ability to make some fields optional or mandatory depending on how busy the market is and how much demand you have. So right now, I know for most of your listeners, if they're out in Ontario, you guys have for a very long time been a very low supply, high demand market. So you've got lots of applications. I would then definitely advise to have all your fields made as a requirement. So you can turn that on for collecting a photo of a government issued ID, pay stubs, perhaps a letter of employment, different other documentation that you'll want to have to make an informed decision on whether or not when you're going to select that tenant, your screen process. So all that information is collected in the application. Once the tenant hits submit, you get the application back within seconds. We say up to 5 minutes, but it's usually less than a minute. and it's extremely comprehensive. It basically gives you all the same information that you would have as if you're a bank or a car dealership making a loan on their assets. So it makes a ton of sense when considering that most properties these days are easily and well into the six figures. You need to have that information to be making the same kind of decision. Our next service is a rent collection, and it's basically the same way that you pay rent through a savings account through pre-authorized debit. For example, just how you probably pay a utility bill with your utility company. And that's free for up to 3 transactions per month. And then the last thing that we have, it's a pretty cool product. It's really new in North America and in Canada, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, is called our rent guarantee. Best way to think of it, it's kind of like insurance, but essentially we protect against damages, unpaid rent. We'll cover up to $60,000 of unpaid rent or the first 12 months. We'll cover up to $10,000 of damages. And let's say worst comes to shove and you have to go through the eviction process, we'll also cover those legal fees and help you out during the eviction process. Because at that time, we're now paying out on our books and we're as motivated as you are to reduce and minimize any losses. So it's really a good product. It does quite well for someone who's net new, who doesn't know what they don't know, and they want that sleep at night peace of mind. And also in the provinces where perhaps the eviction process is very long and cumbersome, which in Ontario, where most of your listeners are probably at, is definitely an extra comfort to have with the LTB and the backups that they have right now.
Great. Thanks so much for providing an overview of all the great services that SingleKey provides. And definitely we can dive a bit more into them there. But yes, on the website there, it talks about the fact that SingleKey helps provide risk-free renting, because I think everyone's worst nightmare is buying a investment property and then having tenants that don't pay the rent, and then you're responsible for paying the mortgage and you're not getting any rent and you're caught in a situation there. Now, I know that a lot of people are worried about that, but I just wanted to say, if you do your due diligence and make sure, if you do the tenant report and make sure that the tenant is high quality and they have a good credit score and criminal background check and all that, and they have a good job, you can really minimize your chances. And that's really like, you may hear these tenant horror stories, but those occurrences are very rare and far between. And if you do this proper due diligence, you can really prevent that there. But maybe you can speak to the point of how SingleKey actually helps provide people with risk-free renting, because many people say, oh, I'd like to own a rental property one day, but they don't actually, it's always an idea in their head and they don't actually move forward with it. So maybe you can talk about how SingleKey actually does provide risk-free renting and how it can help put people's minds at ease who may be sitting on the fence and always wanted to own an investment property but haven't actually pulled the trigger and move forward with it.
No, it's a great point, Sean. I'm sure you probably went through these kind of same emotions. I definitely did when I first became a rental house provider and a landlord. I was completely nervous to have someone not pay rent and have 2 mortgages under my name. My entire credit score and finances were at risk. And then even beyond that too, is just if I picked the wrong person and they destroyed the property, I would have been devastated. Just not only the cost to deal with it, but just the emotional stress. And it is a lot. Those horror stories, they, like you said, they are not very common, but they're common enough where they do happen. And it's usually, look into those stories, it's all the work's done up front on a tenancy. If I was to measure it out, it'd be 9 out of 10, 9% of the effort is all up front on that due diligence stage. It's so critically important to pick the right tenant that's a good fit for you. And that's where I think SingleKey really shines really well, is we've got extremely comprehensive report, typical reports between 15 and 20 pages on the applicant that's got a average credit score history. So there's just a ton of information. You see all the historical payments on their credit products. So lines of credit, cell phone bills, credit cards, whatever it might be. You can see historically how well they've paid that. And it really comes down to 2 major facets of finding a great tenant. One is making sure that they're financially sound. That's actually the easier side of it. That's more of an absolute numbers game. And once you get kind of familiar looking at the scores and the different things you see and all that, you'll be able to determine that quite quickly. Probably what takes a little bit more effort and a little bit more of a skill just to kind of figure out over time is finding that tenant that's the right fit. from a relationship perspective. It's a long-term business relationship that you're getting into, and you got to find someone that you get along with, that you don't mind answering the phone and helping them out. If your skin curls and the hair raises in the back of your neck every time that phone call comes from the tenant, you probably haven't picked the best tenant to deal with. And then your likelihood of staying in the business long enough to enjoy those rewards of real estate and the appreciation that comes with it won't be attainable. You'll burn out before you even get there. And you don't want to be in that position.
Very well said. I agree completely. And maybe you can just talk about how Single Key fits into the rental property steps. Like for somebody, you could take a more hands-on approach, like doing everything yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're like, maybe you agree with this or not, but I would say if you're a first-time landlord, rather than just going the property manager route immediately, I find it's a good learning experience to do it yourself. And only when you're ready to kind of scale your portfolio and own like two, three, four, five, that's when you might look into a property manager there. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, so how does Single Key fit into like owning and managing a rental property? Would you say that Single Key helps do some of the things that a property manager would do? And I understand that you even provide your services to property managers. So maybe is Single
Yeah.
Key kind of a good step between do it yourself and property manager? Does it kind of fit somewhere in the middle between those two options there?
Right. Yeah. So, Sean, great question. We're basically a toolbox for landlords. We offer a bunch of these services that you need to find that great tenant to fill that vacancy. We don't do property management itself. We're just a complementary service. We're the fastest growing tenant screening service across Canada. We've been doing that probably over a year now. We acquired our biggest competitor last year, which was Neighborly. And we're just essentially, I say that it's without a doubt, we're the best, do your research as well. I've used other services in the past, but the fact that what I really like is with the digital application, you have the choice to send it to the tenant and have them fill out their own information, which is what we recommend. And I think it's a best practice because the likelihood of a tenant to make a mistake filling out a form with their own information is far less than you filling in their information. They know the information well. They know their own name, birth date, all that kind of stuff. So the likelihood of them making a typo is very low. So you get just a higher chance of a return or report that's got an accurate hit, which is, where we pull the information from Equifax. So that's just on the front part. And again, what I really want to kind of bring home is during the life of a tenancy from start to finish, that vast majority of the work's done up front. And it's just so critical to get the right person in. If you got the right person in, they're timely with their communication, they pay rent on time, they'll let you know if there's an issue with the property, you're able to fix repairs proactively and minimize any costly repairs from letting a maintenance issue fester and get worse. And then they're just also generally easy to deal with. And that's really where I love about Single Key is we really help you figure out the financial piece to make sure that they can afford the property and the rent that they're applying for. And then we've got some other tips along the way. This is my big focus. So how I got even met up with Single Key, Sean, was I run the largest Facebook group in Alberta for landlords, the Alberta Landlord community. And Single Key was one of the first discounts or partnerships we brought into our group. And it's also daunting. I think that probably another thing we should address too is you're doing this balancing act. You're an entrepreneur. You've got, on one hand, a large capital investment that is at risk that you're trying to protect. So, your down payment on a property, I'd say it was 80, 100K 5 years ago. It's gone up now for sure. So it's a ton of money. And on the other side, you've got a customer that you're trying to please, and they have a high expectation, as they should, that they want to call your rental their home. And you have to balance these two things. And that's where this challenge comes in of being a landlord. But if you pick the right person that you can work with, it makes the entire process a lot easier. And that's where Single Key really fits that mode up front.
Very well said. And I'd like to talk a bit more about these services there. So, and
Sure.
where they fit into the process of getting a tenant. So with the tenant report, like nowadays when you're renting a property out, you might have your own application form. Maybe the province that you're in has some sort of standard application form. The provinces all really have like a standard lease form that you're supposed to use, but I'm just curious. So if you're going to be using the Single Key tenant report, would you still
Mhm.
have somebody fill in like application form for the property, or if there's like a standard provincial one, or would you just send them like, yeah, maybe you could walk through the steps, like you'd post
Yeah,
a listing
good question,
and
Sean.
somebody would reach out and then you'd have
Mhm.
them over to your property, and let's say things go well, then what would be the next steps? Would you have them fill in any sort of form, or would you just skip that entirely and send the link to Single Key, have them fill that in there? And I'm just curious in terms of costs, like is there an
Yep.
option for the tenant to pay the cost of the credit check and the report? Is there an option for the landlord to do that as well? Because I'm guessing in some markets where there's like low supply of rental properties, the tenants would probably be okay with paying those fees there instead of the landlord paying them, which can be a bit like can add up if you're doing it for like 5 or 10 people there. So yeah, maybe you could just walk through the steps of that.
Yeah, for sure, Sean. So we'll talk from two different angles. We'll talk from someone who's a net new landlord doing this for the first time. And then we can also talk about tying into an existing process with a landlord that already has a bit of their own onboarding or application process in place.
Okay, sounds good.
So if you're brand new and first time ever landlording, our application is compliant across all provinces here in Canada. So I would suggest start there and using it. Probably what you find over time, there'll be probably a few nuances or questions that aren't really covered by our application that you'll want to have. And I suggest after the fact of having the application come through is you have a separate communication and email going out and ask those questions. And that's what I do. And I also actually suggest, this sounds counterintuitive, but you want to have multiple touch points with the prospective tenant as you go through the screening process, because you want to see how good they are at communicating and how timely are their responses. And if you only send one email and asking everything at once, you don't really get to judge their ability to respond over a course of time or a period of time. And then when you go through the Single Key portal, you have a choice to either send off the link, have them fill out the information as we already mentioned, or if you already have an existing application that you want to use. So we're going to flip over to the landlords that have a bit of their own application or process in place. You can go and fill in their information manually and start the report that way as well. And then also for pricing, do you have the choice to pay for the reporting fee yourself or outsource that cost to the tenants? And I would say that it really depends on where your market is again. Again, I'm talking to your listeners being out in Ontario. You guys have a strong market right now. You probably have the ability to push that cost out towards the tenants. And actually that makes a really good pre-screening step is do they have the ability to pay for a $25 report? So it is a pay per use as well. So it's $24.99. Though I know your listeners, we've got an exclusive discount set up for an additional 10% off. So $2.50. So that's pretty sweet. That $2.50 off is the discount on repurchased by the landlord. If you push that cost on towards the tenant, they do pay the full price of $25. But what I usually suggest too, because like you said, what if you have to do 5 or 10 tenants, is your screening process should get you towards a short list where you've got your top candidates that you actually want to pre-screen or run through the report. So I wouldn't say you want to run this on everybody because that will add up quite quickly, but it makes a lot of sense to probably get to your top 2 or 4 candidates and run the report on them. Another best practice too is all the adults over the legal age in your province should be on that lease, because if someone does, you want to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And if something does go wrong and you have to go after them for damages or unpaid rent, well, you've got now more bank accounts to chase and a higher probability of collecting on those outstanding arrears. So because that's how you want to structure your leases, then you should also be credit checking and running the report on every person that's an adult on the application. So if you've got a couple applying, you're going to run 2 reports. So it will cost you 2 report fees.
Perfect. Thanks for walking through new landlords and even people that are more experienced. I think most helpful there. And yes, we've got about 5 minutes here left. So just curious, did you want to maybe talk a bit more about the rent collection and rent guarantees? Is there anything else that you wanted to add to that there? Because yeah, what would you say? So on the rent collection front, I mean, most people would think I could just request 12 post-dated checks from the tenants. Maybe you can tell me why, like the benefits of your rent guarantee and why it's better than just doing the standard 12 post-dated checks there.
Yeah. So let's look at the 3 generally main options. I'm just going to leave cash out of the picture because I don't recommend collecting cash. for a plethora of reasons. There's no documentation trail. You can get into a he said, she said type game, which you don't want to be in. And then typically transactions that involve cash usually means cash has come from probably some sort of illegal activity. So you want to stick to a good, clear documentation trail. So that comes down to one of three options. Post-dated checks, as you mentioned, Sean. Your second option will be e-transfers, and then the rent collection that we offer. So the pros across the board for each of these options, the checks, you can get them in advance. You can take a picture of your phone, deposit it. The e-transfers, they're instantaneous. They transfer within, I think it's like 45 minutes, or some banks might have up to a couple hours. So it's basically near real time getting paid out. That would probably be the one con against our rent collection. It is a little bit slower compared to an e-transfer. But the positive side, or the pro of the rent collection, it's automated. You don't have to rely on a tenant every month to remember to go into the bank and log in and send you an e-transfer for the funds. It's done automatically, withdraws it, which is great for recurring payments, just like rent. So that's where it really shines well. You can kind of just remove one less thing off the plate, ensure that you get paid in time, and have that permission step ahead of time so you can just auto withdraw every month. So then that would be kind of the con on the e-transfer side, is they have to remember. Now, lastly, with the post-dated checks, if they don't have the right amount of funds in their account and the check bounces, you'll get dinged with a withdrawal fee. You can pass that on to the tenant, but then that's another thing you have to collect on later down the road. So it just adds a little bit more logistics to deal with getting paid and keeping your cash flow current. But then the delay time as well, because it does take a few days for these checks to get processed, business days that is. And then if it does bounce, you're even probably 3 or 4, or even the 5th business day into finding that out. And all of a sudden now you could possibly be a week or 2 behind collecting rent. And that just, you don't want to be in that position as well. So really, I suggest, like, if you want to kind of streamline it, automation of the rent collection is great. If you want that rent collected a little bit sooner, then the e-transfer works just as well.
Yes, very well said. And yes, something else came to mind. I have a friend that is a landlord himself, and he's a big fan of Single Key. And yes, maybe you can just talk about how the tenant report is more thorough than like a normal application form that you would do. Like, I heard that there's some sort of criminal background check. I mean, hopefully nobody that applies to your property has a criminal record, but yeah, maybe you can talk about how much more thorough it is, because yeah, I'm not sure how you would do a criminal background check yourself. It's not so easy, but apparently Single Key helps facilitate that easily.
Yeah, for sure. So we have 2 additional sections, one social media check. And again, I want to speak from the position of our job is to arm you with as much information as possible, with the most amount of information possible, to make the most informed decision. So we present you the information. And so with that social media check, we'll scan, and we've got some automations in the background that will go and scan the websites and look for related accounts. It's not bulletproof. So there can be times if someone's got a very common name, like a John Smith, there is a possibility of a false account being shown. So really the onus and the due diligence when using this information is on you, the individual as a landlord, to go through and actually analyze the information presented to you. The next thing is, if there's any online available base public records, news reportings of criminal activity, we scan those as well. Now, just the caveat to that is we do have a huge number of databases that's not only in Canada, but in the US as well. And I think there's even some international databases included. If the jurisdiction does not post their records online, we don't have access to it. So the way I use the criminal record check is, if you get a hit, great. Go and do your due diligence, investigate it, ask questions, make sure it's legit, that's the right individual, and then make your own judgment or decision on the information that you found. If you don't get a hit, that doesn't mean there's not something out there. So I don't want to be super clear on that. I'll just give you an example. So I'm out in Alberta. We have our tribunal, the equivalent to the Landlord Tenant Board in Ontario, is called RTDRS, Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service. And they don't post their orders or the results of the hearings online. So we don't have access to that. So that would be an example where there'd be good information out there. It might be a record from perhaps an eviction, unpaid rent, or whatever it might be, that won't get shown up in that record check. But All said and done, the more information, the better. That's why I think it's a huge value add. So about the pricing, as I mentioned, the credit report is pay per use. Your members get a 10% discount if they've purchased the credit report. A rent collection is free. That's for up to 3 transactions per month or payments. If they want to go beyond that, they're more than willing to reach out and negotiate a bulk discount. And then rent guarantee is 5% of the monthly rent. So there you go.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I understand that you have some resources for tenants as well. Maybe you can just talk about that quickly as well as
that's a good point.
Any other things that you have to help tenants.
Yeah, for sure. So right now, the way our credit report works is that the landlord has to initiate the report, the request, then that gets sent out to the tenant to fill out. We're very close to launching, I'd say a little bit later this summer. At the time of this recording, it's July 2023. But hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, we've had it launched now, is the ability for the tenant to go pay the fee once to have their credit report, and then they have the ability to share it as many times as they want. And now what that will do for them is it will just remove less credit check inquiries off of their score. This actually opens up a really interesting question that's been debated quite a bit. This gets into that soft check versus hard check kind of debate or conversation. And it's not really that black and white. There's a little bit more to it because with every credit inquiry, there's also a dollar amount that they're inquiring that the applicant wants to borrow from whatever the provider is, the bank account, or maybe it's a car dealership or whatever. We don't have a dollar amount associated with credit checks from SingleKey. So yes, they do show up on your credit score, but they don't have a lot of weight or value because we don't have a dollar amount assigned to the credit check. We're just saying, hey, we're checking your credit. But nonetheless, with the new tenant-driven report, you can minimize the number of inquiries. So keep the number lower and keep your records a little bit cleaner. So I think that's a great thing. And I think also from a tenant's perspective, this is a great way to shortcut the line and get in front or get shortlisted to get selected for the next available rental that you've applied for. I would, as a landlord, if someone came to me and they already had pulled their credit score and they've shared it with me, and in the way, I should also highlight that their credit score gets shared directly from SingleKey by giving a link to the prospective landlord, and they go log on, create an account with SingleKey, and then pull the report directly from us. So then they have it, they know that they're getting an accurate, truthful, unaltered or fabricated report because it's coming directly from us, SingleKey, the source, a trusted source. Whereas if you get screenshots, nowadays I see tenants and landlords accept or use screenshots of, say, Credit Karma, Borrowwell, or whatever credit score app that they're using. It's quite easy for someone to spend even a few minutes to really change a credit score quite quickly. So I don't recommend doing that. It's not a good practice to do it because you set yourself up for the possibility of getting a fraudulent paperwork.
Great. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, Sean, again, thank you so much for letting me come on your show. I always love having these conversations. It's an industry that I'm truly passionate about. And I joined it with the initial prerogative to provide a nest egg and some financial wealth or generational wealth for my children. But now seeing it and providing homes to people that really deserve and need it is super rewarding. And I think our whole goal here at SingleKey is to bridge that trust gap, is take that risk out of renting for both parties and allow everyone to get to their next rental household or renter sooner and faster is where we're going at. So we actually have a huge, and I guess lastly, I'll wrap up with, we have a huge resource over. If you go to singlekey.com and click on a resource in our blog tab, there's a ton of great information for you there as well to check out. And we have articles all across the board from due diligence, tenant screening, marketing, and all the other risk categories that comes along with owning a property.
Very well said. And I'm definitely using SingleKey next time that I rent out a property. And we have a special discount for everyone. So be sure to check out the show notes for full details. So I just wanted to thank you once again for being on the podcast, MacKenzie, and sharing the great tool that is SingleKey for landlords to help make the process as stress-free and easy as possible.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Burn Your Mortgage podcast. Besides being a podcast host, I'm also an independent mortgage broker. If you or anyone you know, family, friends, coworkers, or neighbors could ever use any unbiased mortgage advice or a second opinion, feel free to reach out. Email me at Sean, that's SEAN, at burnyourmortgage.ca, or call or text me at 647-867-3711 for a free mortgage consultation. Also, be sure to head on over to www.burnyourmortgage.ca and sign up for my free weekly newsletter. As a small token of my appreciation, you'll be able to download my ultimate mortgage checklist on choosing the perfect mortgage. I look forward to hearing from you and helping you with all your mortgage needs. Once again, thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Mortgage podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and leave a rating. Until next time, happy mortgage burning.